I had always been a scholar of little note, a quiet observer in the endless sprawl of the hive world. My life was measured in soot, labor, and the dim glow of artificial lights that barely pierced the oppressive gloom. The spires rose like jagged teeth, swallowing the lower tiers in shadow. Smoke and dust clung to every surface. Life moved in rhythms of obedience and exhaustion. I recorded what I saw. Nothing more. I never imagined I would witness what was coming. Among the countless workers, one figure drew my attention. He was plain, unremarkable, yet his eyes were different, sharp, restless. They lingered on corners where shadows pooled. He paused at machinery and cracked walls, fingers tracing the worn surfaces. A subtle tension clung to him, something I could feel from where I watched. I did not approach, only observed. The hive pressed in, corridors twisted endlessly, pipes groaned under pressure. Air was thick with chemicals and the sweat of lives spent in endless labor. Priests and magistrates drifted through the crowd like phantoms of authority, issuing decrees that vanished into the haze. Light was rare, fleeting, as if the sun itself feared to linger here. Yet he moved with a purpose, deliberate, careful, measured. At times I saw him pause and glance around, as if listening. His hands clenched, shoulders tensed, fingers twitching along worn metal and stone. Sometimes he muttered under his breath, words I could not hear. But his eyes told me more than words could. They darted, searching, questioning, haunted by something beyond the day-to-day grind of the hive. One evening I followed him through a narrow passage where shadows pooled like ink. He moved with silent urgency, stopping at crumbling walls, tapping a finger over faded symbols I could not recognize. His body quivered, small shivers that spoke of fear, anticipation, or perhaps longing. I kept my distance. I could not interfere. I could only watch, record, try to make sense of what little I understood. Later I found him in a forgotten chapel. The mural of the god emperor was faded, paint flaking, yet he traced it with careful fingers. His lips moved, whispering soft words I could barely catch. There is more, something beyond them. His tone was hesitant, reverent, seen. As if speaking to something unseen. I did not ask, I did not intervene, I wrote it all down. Every quiver of his hands, every pause of his gaze, every tiny tremor. The hive seemed to respond, shadows stretched longer, lights flickered, and the stale air thickened. Pipes groaned as though echoing the tension. Even the rats moved differently, skittering along edges of corridors with a nervous urgency. Nothing else noticed him. No one cared. But I did. I could not look away. Every motion, every whispered fragment felt like a thread leading into something vast, something unnamed. As I retreated to my quarters that night, I kept replaying the image of him standing in the chapel. His silhouette was small against the towering murals. Yet there was a weight to him, an insistence. I did not understand what he was chasing, or what he had begun to sense. I only knew something was coming. Something beyond the hive, beyond the rules we all lived by. And he would be the first to meet it. I could only follow from a distance. Shadows twisted, light faltered. His figure moved deeper into the hive, reaching for something I could not yet see. And I could only watch, record, and wonder if I, too, might be drawn into the current that had claimed him. The nights grew colder, darker, the hive's corridors twisting into tighter shadows. I watched him as he moved alone through the maze of stairways and maintenance shafts. His steps were careful, almost ritualistic. Each pause, each glance over his shoulder, a silent conversation with the shadows. He whispered occasionally soft syllables that faded into the hiss of steam. I could not understand the words, only their intent, the urgency, the fear, the fascination. Sometimes he would stop entirely, head tilted, eyes fixed on nothing. Yet I could see his fingers twitching, tracing invisible lines in the air. I dared not approach, and even if I wanted to, I could not be sure what force he was chasing, or what was chasing him. Only the signs were visible, a tremor in his hands, a quiver of his shoulders, sweat beading on his brow, and always the eyes, wide, alert, haunted by something beyond the walls of the hive. I began to follow more closely, taking advantage of the maze-like corridors that offered cover. He never noticed. Perhaps he was too absorbed, or perhaps the hive itself shielded him. At times I would pause behind pipes, silently recording each movement. The way his gaze would sweep over symbols etched into walls, the way his lips moved in whispers to the emptiness. I began to sense a pattern, though what it meant I could not name. One evening, he lingered near a sealed door in a forgotten sector. His hand rested lightly on the cold metal, tracing a sequence of scratches that might have been random or might have been deliberate. He muttered something low, a name or a plea. I could not hear it, yet the tension in his body spoke louder than words ever could. A chill ran down my spine as I realized he was seeking something or someone. Far beyond the ordinary, the hive seemed to shift around him. Pipes groaned as if responding to the unspoken energy. Steam hissed through vents. Rats scattered into corners unnaturally skittish. Even the lights flickered, casting long, crawling shadows. No one else noticed, but I did. I could not turn away. The man moved with a purpose I could not comprehend. His obsession was growing, consuming him in ways visible to the careful observer. Later I found him standing before a cracked wall mural of the god emperor. His fingers traced the faded paint and his lips whispered again, "There is more, something beyond them." His voice trembled slightly. I did not speak. I did not interfere. I only recorded the movement of his hands, the shiver in his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned the darkness beyond the mural. All told a story of unrest, of a mind reaching toward the unknown. As the days passed, he became more restless. He moved through the hive at odd hours. He lingered where shadows were thickest. Occasionally he would talk to others, workers, pilgrims, the forgotten, but always in cryptic murmurs, never revealing the source of his obsession. I observed from afar. Each encounter left a mark, a flicker of fear, a momentary hesitation, a subtle pull of attention towards something unseen, and then, one night, I followed him to a small assembly of forgotten corridors, where no light dared linger. He stood before a group of similarly drawn individuals, all strangers yet drawn to him. I stayed hidden, heart pounding. He spoke to them softly, words I could not catch. Gestures precise, commanding yet reverent. The others responded with silent acknowledgement, eyes wide, hands trembling. I realized he was not alone in his fixation. Others were sensing the same pull, the same shadow of something unnamed. I retreated into the deeper alleys, keeping my distance, recording every motion, every whispered phrase, every tremor of body or soul that I could see. The hive was becoming more than a city. It was a stage, and he was the first actor. I could only watch and wonder how far this obsession would carry him. Something was beginning, a movement beyond the walls, beyond reason, beyond all that I had known. I did not understand it yet, but I would witness its first steps, and I could only follow, record, and wait. The corridors of the hive seemed darker now, heavier. I followed him as he moved toward the spires where the priests gathered. His steps were cautious, deliberate. The air smelled of incense and dust, the stale mix of ritual and neglect. He paused at the gates, hands brushing the carved stone. His eyes darted upward, searching. Inside, the priests were assembling. They wore the marks of office. Long robes, sharp eyes, voices like sharp-edged knives. He approached one, head bowed slightly, hands extended in plea. I stayed in the shadowed recess, watching. "Why do you seek answers where none are given?" The priest spat. The words were cold, slicing the space between them. "You tread where you should not. You speak of things forbidden, of thoughts corrupt. Begone, heretic." He did not move immediately. His jaw tightened, fingers clenched. I could see the subtle tremor in his hands, the slight shift of weight from foot to foot. Yet he stayed, listening, and speaking softly, though I could not hear the words. The priest's scorn was clear, dismissive, as if he were invisible. The scene unfolded like a study in ritualized rejection. The priests did not explain. They did not offer guidance. They only commanded obedience, stamping silence over questions. I noted it all. The man's posture stiffened. His eyes flickered with tension. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Each gesture spoke volumes to one who watched closely, frustration, confusion, a spark of defiance. Finally, he turned away, not in surrender, but something else. A slow, measured step back into the streets. I followed at a distance. His pace quickened, as if driven by a purpose he could not name. The hive itself seemed to press in, walls narrowing, shadows thickening. He sought out forgotten alcoves, stairwells abandoned by time. His fingers brushed over stone carvings, inscriptions I could not read. Occasionally he muttered under his breath, "Bitum," syllables lost to the cavernous space. I could not hear the words, only the tension, the urgency. His body spoke for him, tight shoulders, clenched fists, a slight rocking of his feet. The city's pulse and his own were tangled but moving together. By the end of the night, he had paused at a ruined hall, the walls lined with faded texts and scrolls. He bent low, fingers running along brittle pages. Dust coated his hands, yet he paid no heed. He whispered once, just barely audible, a name, a fragment of thought, the weight of seeking in his voice. He did not know I watched, but I did. I recorded every motion, every glance, every tremor that betrayed his inner storm. The hive responded. Lights flickered, pipes groaned, shadows seemed to lean closer to him, almost protective, or waiting. The murmur of the distant city seemed to hush around him, leaving only his movements and the sound of dust shifting beneath his steps. He straightened slowly, hands covered in dust, eyes scanning the emptiness beyond. Something had changed. The scorn of the priests had not silenced him. It had sharpened him, driven him toward paths few dared tread. He paused near a collapsed archway. The wind, or some vibration in the hive, rippled through the corridor. He inhaled sharply, shoulders rising, then squared. His lips moved, whispering words I could not hear. But his tone was different now. Resolute, edged with defiance. He had accepted that no one in the official faith would give him answers. He would seek them elsewhere. I stayed hidden, yet closer now, compelled to observe. As I retreated into darker corridors, I realized this was only the beginning. His steps were no longer aimless. Every gesture, every whispered syllable, every shiver in his body traced a line away from the order of the hive, toward the unknown. I could only follow and record. The hive seemed to pulse with his intent. Shadows stretched long and unnatural. Flickering lights cast jagged shapes across the walls. The stench of decay and industry mixed with incense, suffocating. And through it all, he moved, determined, unyielding. A man changed by dismissal, scorn, and the hunger for something forbidden. I could see it in his posture, in the set of his jaw, in the fire flickering behind his eyes. He was no longer a man content with obedience. He was beginning to chase something greater, or something darker. He wandered deeper into the hive, seeking places the priests would never tread. I followed, keeping to the shadows. His steps led him to hidden alcoves, crumbling libraries, and forgotten archives where dust lay thick over brittle pages. He moved with purpose, fingers brushing over titles, scanning for signs that might guide him. Signs that the priests had denied him. At times he crouched over a tome, tracing symbols with trembling fingers. He whispered again, words I could not hear, syllables that hovered in the air and vanished. His eyes were wide, alert, hungry. Each turn of a page revealed nothing concrete. Each passage offered only fragments, broken truths scattered like ash. He did not despair outwardly. His jaw was set. His hands shook, but he pressed on, moving from one hidden archive to the next. Occasionally he glanced over his shoulder as if sensing me following. Yet he never acknowledged my presence. I remained still, a witness. Days passed. Slowly he found others. They were all misfits, lost in their own way, workers, scribes, pilgrims who had glimpsed something beyond the ordinary. They gathered cautiously, speaking in whispers. I watched their first meetings from hidden corners. Hands trembled as they exchanged scraps of writing. Eyes flickered with fear and awe. The man moved among them, guiding, leading, an unspoken magnet drawing them in. Together they attempted rituals. I did not participate, only watched. First they sought corn. Blood was spilled, red, hot, dripping. Yet the god offered nothing. The man's hands clenched, jaw tight. A shiver ran through him. Disappointment was clear. Next, they turned to Nurgle. Rotting fruit, infected water, the stench of decay. The group recoiled, their stomachs twisted. Some heaved, his eyes widened. Horror, fascination, but still no response, only emptiness. Slanesh came after. Symbols of pleasure and ecstasy were arranged. Candles, oil, the faint perfume of indulgence. Faces shone with false delight, yet it felt hollow. Even the man paused, fingers trembling, lips moving in quiet protest. Nothing came. Finally they sought Tzeentch. The hall was filled with books and talismans, arcane symbols carved into stone. They chanted softly, carefully. Words lost to the wind, knowledge fractured, hints of truth, pieces that refused to form. He shook his head slowly, the weight of frustration pressing down, and then it happened. In the quiet aftermath, he whispered something different, not a plea, not a question. I strained to hear. A voice, not theirs. It speaks. You belong to me. He spoke it almost to himself, eyes wide, pupils dilated, hands shaking. The others froze, sensing something shifting. The air seemed to thicken, shadows leaned closer. I remained unseen, yet felt the change ripple through the group. I watched him then, alone and yet surrounded. His shoulders quivered, hands rising, curling, a mixture of fear, awe, and revelation. The group around him mirrored his response. Small movements, shivering hands, uncertain glances. Something new had entered their world, a force unnamed. The hive felt different that night, sounds dulled. Pipes groaned with slow, resonant echoes. The smell of oil and dust became heavier, oppressive. Light flickered, vanished in corners where it should have lingered, and in the center of it all, he stood, the man who had been scorned by priests, now trembling with the first taste of a power beyond chaos itself. I recorded it all, every gesture, every whispered syllable, every shiver and wide-eyed glance. He had crossed a threshold, The familiar gods had offered nothing, and in that void something else had spoken. I could not name it. I did not know its nature, but it had chosen him, or he had chosen it. The first steps of this new devotion had begun. Shadows clung closer to him, the others followed, and I could only watch, pen in hand, as the hive's corridors swallowed them deeper into the unknown. The group huddled in a forgotten chamber, dust thick in the air. Candles flickered, barely cutting the shadows. He stood at the center, silent, eyes wide. His hands hovered over worn symbols, trembling, tracing invisible lines. The others watched him, hesitant, anxious. Drawn by something unseen, he whispered again. Not to the group, not to the void. This time, words carried weight. It speaks. Not the four, something else, something beyond. His voice cracked. Fear and awe mingled in each syllable. I could see the tremor in his shoulders, the tight clench of his fists, the shallow rise and fall of his chest. The group shifted uneasily. Some leaned closer, drawn by the sound, though none could see what I could only sense. His intensity. The hive outside groaned. Pipes hummed. Shadows twisted, stretching long along the walls. The air seemed heavier, as if pressing down upon all of us. He sank to his knees, fingers clutching the edges of the stone floor. His head bowed, lips moving in soft, broken whispers. I could not hear the words clearly, only the cadence, the rhythm, the insistence. And then, a single sentence pierced the silence. A voice, not theirs. It says, "You belong to me." The words hung in the chamber like smoke. His eyes lifted slowly, glassy and fixed, scanning the darkness beyond the room. There was a fire there, something that had not been before. His lips quivered again, repeating fragments, murmuring as if confirming a reality no one else could perceive. The others mirrored his tension. Some shivered, some pressed palms to faces, none spoke. None could deny the weight that settled over them. It was as though the hive itself had bent closer, leaning in to listen. He rose then, shaking slightly, hands still trembling, eyes bright with an unnatural clarity. He moved among them, voice soft, compelling. This is not the path of the four. It is not Korn, Nurgle, Slanesh, or Tzinch. Something else, something unnamed. It calls, and I answer. A shiver ran through the group. The room felt smaller. Shadows deepened. Candles flickered, guttering under unseen wind. Dust rose in tiny spirals around their feet. He stepped forward, and I saw the first real change, a resolve that bordered on obsession. The disappointment of the false gods had sharpened him, focused him. He was no longer simply seeking. He was listening, waiting, responding. I could see the hive press against the walls, closing in. Pipes groaned. The air became thick with expectation. Every heartbeat, every flicker of light, every twitch of muscle spoke to the rising force gathering in that chamber. It was palpable, a tension that did not belong entirely to the room or its inhabitants. Something was present, something beyond comprehension, and he had found it. The man paused near the center, hands rising slowly. He muttered fragments, syllables too strange to comprehend, yet spoken with perfect conviction. The others leaned closer, drawn into his orbit, fear mixed with awe. Even I, a distant observer, felt it pressing against my mind. A whisper I could almost hear, yet not, and then he said it again, clearer this time, for all to hear. A voice, not the four. It speaks. You belong to me. The group froze, eyes wide, breaths shallow. The air shifted, shadows moved. Even the hive seemed to hold its breath. The first step had been taken. The path beyond chaos had opened, and he had stepped onto it. I wrote it all down, every gesture, every whisper, every tremor and glance. This night marked the end of one journey and the start of another. One that I could only observe, record, and dread. The unknown had begun to call. And he had answered. The night after the voice had spoken, he gathered them in hidden corridors of the Hive. The others, misfits, seekers, those who had glimpsed the impossible, came quietly, eyes wide, hands trembling. He moved among them, silent but commanding. Every glance, every gesture seemed to draw them closer. I remained at the edge, recording, careful not to disturb. The air was thick with dust and anticipation. Candles were placed, symbols arranged on cracked floors. The group whispered to one another, sharing experiences that echoed his own. Voices they had heard, shadows that had stirred, whispers that no priest would ever acknowledge. They listened to each other carefully, nodding, sometimes shivering, acknowledging the unseen presence that had begun to bind them. He directed them with soft murmurs, nothing abrupt, nothing forceful, just guidance. Hands moved to correct a symbol, to steady a candle, to mark a spot, every motion precise, every breath measured. They were cautious, yet eager, drawn towards something they did not fully understand. Their fear was palpable, but their need was stronger. I watched them silently. The man's eyes were bright, alert, a reflection of the unknown force that had chosen him. He spoke once, barely audible, and the others leaned closer, ears straining. "We are not seeking the four gods," he said softly. "We are listening and preparing." His words carried a weight that drew all attention. The group worked through the night, placing tokens, tracing symbols, arranging candles in careful arcs and spirals. Dust rose with every motion, stirred by nervous fingers. The walls echoed with whispered repetition, the sound thin and fragile, yet insistent. Each of them seemed to act simultaneously, guided by something beyond their conscious minds. Something he had begun to hear. I could see the subtle changes in him. His hands trembled less as the night went on, shoulders straightened, gaze sharper. He moved with purpose, occasionally glancing at the others to reassure, to correct, to guide. It was not leadership alone. It was communion. I could sense the presence he had spoken of. Not seen, not tangible, but there, hovering in the space between them. The hive around them seemed to respond, shadows stretched, long and unnatural. Pipes groaned with low resonance. Dust motes hung in the flickering candlelight like silent witnesses. The air was heavier, charged, pressing down on all of us. Each heartbeat echoed like a drum in the silence. The walls seemed to bend closer, as if the hive itself leaned in to watch. I noted everything. Every small gesture, every whispered syllable, every glance between the cultists. Their fear, their anticipation, their awe, all of it revealed the slow shaping of a devotion that had not existed before. The rituals were not complete, they were preparation. But the first steps towards something greater had begun. And in the center of it all, he paused, eyes closed, head bowed, hands raised slightly as if feeling the air itself. He murmured again softly, repeating fragments I could not understand. The others mirrored him, stilling themselves, waiting for what I could not name, could not see. The hive held its breath with them, every creak of metal, every hiss of steam amplifying the tension. This was the moment when doubt gave way to intent. The voice that had chosen him, the presence unnamed, it had been acknowledged. Not yet called forth, not yet revealed, but its influence was undeniable. The group had crossed an invisible threshold. They were no longer alone in their obsession. They were a circle bound by whispers, shadows, and the promise of revelation. I stepped back into the deeper corridor, pen in hand, eyes trained on them. The man's gaze lifted briefly as if sensing me. He smiled, not openly, not in triumph, but with understanding. They would begin the ritual soon, and I would witness it, record it, and wait. The hive outside was silent. Its machinery, its pipes, its shadows, all seemed to bend around the small group. The night had become a living thing, pressing close, waiting. And at the center of it he stood, poised, trembling, aware. A conduit for something beyond comprehension. The first step had been taken. The rest would follow. The night had deepened, swallowing the corridors of the hive. Candles flickered, shadows trembling along the cracked walls. The cultists formed a tight circle, hands joined, voices low and hesitant. Murmuring fragments of words I could barely understand. He moved among them, silent, guiding their gestures with subtle nods, slight movements. Like a conductor shaping unseen forces. The air thickened, dust hanging heavier than before. Pipes groaned. The walls seemed to lean closer. His eyes were wide, alert, reflecting the trembling candlelight. Every gesture precise, every breath measured. Shoulders coiled and uncoiled with tension. Fingers trembled slightly, then steadied. The rhythm of their murmurs grew stronger, urgent, almost pleading. One by one the candles dimmed. A cold draft slithered through the chamber. Shadows lengthened, twisting, converging in corners. I felt it then, a presence. Not solid, not tangible, yet undeniable. It pressed against the edges of perception, crawling along my spine, coiling around every hair on the back of my neck. He paused, eyes closed, head tilted, lips moving in near-silent repetition. The others mirrored him, still, attentive, hanging on every subtle movement. The air thickened further. Light struggled to cling to the edges of the room. Shadows became almost solid, forming shapes just beyond recognition. Shapes that belonged to nothing I had ever read about in demonology. The murmurs crescendoed. A subtle vibration ran through the floor, faint yet insistent. I watched him rise slowly, arms extending, fingers splayed as if to touch the unseen. His voice cut through the whispers, soft yet commanding. Come, show yourselves as you are. Not the four, not bound by names. The room shivered. Shadows twisted faster. The air seemed alive, moving in currents I could not see. Something stirred. Vast, ancient, older than the hive. Older than any god they had feared. I glimpsed movement in the corner of my vision. A shifting, formless shape, unmistakable yet impossible to define. He stepped forward. The others faltered, but he moved with certainty. The air grew colder, candle flames flickered violently, then snuffed out entirely. Darkness pooled, thick and heavy, almost tangible. I could hear it. The whisper of something distant yet impossibly close, a voice without words, or perhaps with words beyond comprehension. The cultists froze, breaths quickened, hands clenched, then released. Eyes widened, reflecting terror and awe. He stood at the center, quivering, yet serene. Impossibly serene. The presence pressed closer. It was not like any demon, not like the gods they had sought. This was something else, vast, unnamed and infinitely patient. He whispered again, carried on the unseen wind. Not the four, not bound by names. You have come. I wrote every detail, every flicker of shadow, every shiver, every hesitation, every glance. The hive seemed to hold its breath. Walls, pipes, dust, all were witnesses to a presence that did not belong to our reality. He closed his eyes, head bowed, hands raised as if welcoming the invisible force. A subtle shift rippled through the circle. The group moved as one, drawn into communion with the unseen. Darkness thickened, alive with intent, pressing against the limits of perception. Every heartbeat, every tiny sound, magnified by the tension in the room. And then I knew. This was no demon, no god of chaos. This presence, it was different, unnamed, unbound, vast, and it had chosen him. The first step had been taken. The ritual was beginning, the veil between the hive and something greater, thinner than ever. I stepped back, heart pounding, pen trembling. The hive outside faded. Only the circle remained, only him, and the presence between them, immense, silent, waiting. The air seemed to pulse, as if the hive itself were listening, and I knew somehow that the next moment would change everything. The room was silent, thick with tension. Shadows clung to every corner, heavy and shifting. The cultists stood in a tight circle, eyes wide, hands trembling. He stepped forward alone, every motion deliberate, every breath measured. I watched, unseen as the moment unfolded. He sank to his knees, dust rose around him in faint spirals, stirred by his trembling hands. His head bowed, lips moving in words too soft for me to hear. The others froze, watching, waiting, drawn by something beyond their understanding. A chill pressed against my skin. The hive seemed to lean closer, listening. Then he spoke aloud, clear and commanding despite his trembling. "The One, without a name, for he is beyond all title." The words hung in the chamber like smoke. The others stiffened, eyes wide, mouths parted in silent awe. Shadows stretched, pulsing subtly. Candle flames flickered and bent toward him, as if drawn by the unseen force he now addressed. I saw the change in him, something beyond mere devotion. His shoulders straightened, his chest rose and fell with steady rhythm. A subtle light glimmered in his eyes, not human light, not entirely. The presence pressed closer. I felt it even at a distance, immense, patient, aware. The group moved closer, instinctively, almost without thinking. Hands reached out, shaking, for objects, symbols, candles, anything that might connect them to what was unfolding. Some whispered fragmented words, some stayed frozen, overwhelmed, fear mixed with awe, and hope, however small. He raised his hands slowly, palms open to the darkness. He began to murmur again. The words were strange, musical in rhythm, alien in sound. I could not translate them. Yet the room responded. Shadows shifted, air vibrated, dust swirled in silent spirals. The presence was near, tangible in its absence, vast in its immensity. I recorded every detail, every flicker of light, every shift in movement, every tremor of hand or foot. The hive itself seemed to participate, echoing the rhythm of the ritual. Pipes groaned. Walls seemed to breathe. The air was alive, pulsing with a force older than the hive, older than the gods. He lowered his head again, quivering. Yet in his quiver was control, a serene surrender. The others knelt or bowed instinctively. One by one they whispered fragments of recognition, acknowledging the presence without name. The circle had become a conduit, a focus for something vast, unknown, undeniable. I stepped back, pen in hand, chest tight. The hive around us felt smaller, insignificant, irrelevant. Only the circle, only him and the presence remained. It was the end of one journey and the beginning of another. The group was no longer a collection of misfits or seekers. They were believers, witnesses, vessels. And he was more than human now, a bridge between worlds, a vessel chosen by a force unnamed, unbound and beyond comprehension. I shivered at the thought. Every instinct told me this was the start of something unstoppable. The chamber seemed to pulse with life and anticipation. Shadows stretched into the corners, darkness thickened. Even the hive outside remained quiet, as if it too had learned to watch. He remained at the center, quivering, murmuring, smiling faintly, not in triumph, but in understanding. This was the moment when the new devotion was born. The ritual was complete in its first act. The presence had been acknowledged, welcomed, and allowed to touch the world, and I could only observe, write, and prepare to follow, or flee. The hive waited, breathless, the darkness lingered, and somewhere within it, the first echoes of the nameless presence began to stir beyond comprehension. The group had crossed the threshold. The next phase of events would unfold beyond their control. The hive had fallen silent after the ritual. Shadows lingered where the candles had died. The group, once hidden in corridors and empty chambers, now moved with purpose. He walked among them, calm, composed. Yet something in his eyes had changed. The presence they had summoned, the force without name. It had touched him, marked him, and he knew what must come next. He began leaving marks, simple signs etched quickly into the walls of the hive. Symbols only those attuned could notice. Whispered words followed, fragments of the voice repeated softly, almost inaudibly. I watched him from a distance, careful not to interfere, taking note of every movement. The marks were deliberate, small, subtle, yet impossible to ignore once noticed. The others followed, carrying the signs and whispers further into the hive. They moved quietly, slipping past workers, priests, and wandering citizens. Each encounter was fleeting, each whisper carefully measured. Some paused, eyes widening at the sound or the symbol. Some scowled, some trembled, and some listened intently, curiosity sparked by something they could not name. I recorded it all, every glance, every reaction. The hive was vast, and yet with each step their message spread, not loud, not violent, subtle, insidious, like water seeping into cracks. Those who noticed often dismissed it at first, but some could not. They felt the weight behind the signs, a pull they could neither fight nor fully understand. He moved among them, correcting gestures, whispering guidance. The others watched him, eyes bright with a strange devotion. The presence was unseen but palpable. I felt it, even at the edge of the corridors. The hive seemed to bend around them, listening, waiting. It was as if the shadows themselves leaned toward the marks, acknowledging them. At first it was small, one person here, another there. Curiosity, questions, boom, a silent recognition that something beyond the four gods was moving. Some workers paused mid-task, feeling a tug at their mind. Some glanced nervously at walls as if expecting movement in the stone. And some, fewer still, reached out, touching the symbols, whispering the fragments they had heard, letting the voice flow through them. He did not stop them. He encouraged, guided, but never forced. Each new follower was a choice, each recognition of the presence a subtle expansion of its influence. The hive was beginning to change quietly. Shadows grew heavier in some corridors, lighter in others, as if the hive itself had begun to reflect their devotion. I followed silently, pen in hand. Every whispered fragment, every symbol carved, every fearful glance. It all mattered. They were planting seeds, and I could see the first shoots of growth. The faith, the awareness, the devotion, all had begun to move beyond the hidden chamber where it started. The ripple had begun, and nothing could stop it now. And he moved through the hive like a silent herald, guiding, whispering, watching. The presence that had chosen him hummed in every glance, every pause, every careful gesture. The hive itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. The whispers spread slowly at first. One worker noticed a mark on the wall. Another heard the fragments of words as he passed a dim corridor. They paused, puzzled, drawn by something they could not name. Some dismissed it, most did not. A few followed, carefully, hesitantly, their eyes widened at the whispers. Their hands shook as they traced the symbols, and some felt it. The presence beyond names, a pull, a weight, a certainty that they had been missing something their entire lives. They joined him quietly without question. Others reacted differently. Fear coiled in their stomachs, minds snapping under the weight of the unknown. Screams tore through the hive. Bodies convulsed, falling to the floors of dim work chambers. Some died in twisted agony, eyes fixed on shadows that weren't there. I recorded each incident, noting the subtle patterns of terror, the unexplainable precision of the chaos. He moved among them, guiding the curious, avoiding the fearful. His touch was light, almost casual, yet it calmed some and strengthened the resolve of others. He whispered softly, repeating fragments of the voice, the words the marks carried. "Do not fear. Only listen," he murmured. They obeyed, trembling, eyes wide, hearts racing. The hive reacted. Machinery groaned as if sensing the changes, pipes rattled, dust swirled in spirals along corridors, clinging to shadows. The air itself felt charged, heavier in some halls, almost oppressive in others. The influence of the presence was subtle, yet undeniable. The small group expanded. More joined quietly. Some brought friends, others recruited strangers they had watched for years. Fear mixed with curiosity. Some hearts snapped, some minds shattered. The rest followed slowly, drawn by something beyond logic, beyond understanding. I noted it all. Every glance, every step, every twitch of muscle, every whispered word. He never forced anyone. Participation was choice, yet the pull was relentless. The presence that had chosen him reached through him to touch others. Those who resisted felt it as tension, unease, a gnawing at their minds. Those who gave in felt the first stirrings of devotion. It was not open worship. There were no grand halls, no speeches, only whispers, marks, and quiet recognition in hidden corners. The hive itself seemed to bend, shadows stretching longer where the influence grew, flickers of candlelight drawing attention to the symbols. Fear and fascination walked side by side, inseparable. And then, as the night deepened, something changed. The disturbances became noticeable even to the hive authorities. Workers whispered to each other in fear. Some left their posts abruptly. Some faltered mid-task, staring at walls or empty corridors, eyes wide with unspoken terror. The signs of devotion were spreading faster than the hive's order could control. And inevitably someone noticed. Someone with authority. Someone who would not ignore the markings, the whispers, the strange pull on the minds of the population. I watched him stand quietly in a narrow hallway, observing the first ripple of reaction. He smiled faintly, not in triumph, not openly, but in understanding. The first wave had begun. The presence moved through the hive, through the people, unseen yet undeniable. And somewhere beyond the shadows, I knew the next reckoning was coming. The whispers had reached ears they should not have. The marks had been seen by eyes that would report, investigate, and punish. The hive would not remain quiet much longer. The hive had grown restless. The whispers, the marks, the subtle pull on minds, they could not remain hidden. Someone noticed, someone with authority. Soon the Inquisition arrived. Shadows lengthened in the corridors as they moved silently, systematically, hunting the signs, following the trail of devotion and terror. I watched from the edges, pen in hand, breath shallow. They were precise, relentless, their presence pressed against the hive like a cold wind, silencing whispers, flattening fear, and yet they could not see everything. The symbols, the murmurs, the subtle currents of influence. They remained, hidden to all but those attuned. He remained calm. His hands were empty. His eyes focused, unblinking. The Inquisitor confronted him in a narrow hallway, walls close, air heavy. The tension was palpable, like steel straining under pressure. "Who do you serve?" the Inquisitor demanded, voice sharp, commanding. Name the one you follow. Speak, or I will burn your heresy from the hive." He smiled faintly. Not fear, not defiance. Understanding. He tilted his head, considering the words as if tasting their weight. "Not the four," he said softly, yet with clarity. "Not bound by names or chains. There is one beyond. Beyond all gods you know. And I am only the beginning." The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed. Fingers flexed around a bolt pistol, but they did not fire. Silence stretched, thick and tense. Shadows pooled around them. The hive itself seemed to lean closer, listening. "You dare mock the Emperor? Mock the saints? You claim a god beyond the four? Speak now!" The Inquisitor's voice rose, edged with anger and disbelief. "I do not mock," he replied, calm, serene. "The four are not enough. There is a voice, a presence, unseen, unnamed. It calls to me. It chooses vessels. It moves through shadows, through whispers, and it has chosen me first." The Inquisitor stepped closer, the floor creaking under boots. "Then your life ends here, heretic. I will cleanse this hive with fire. I will burn your words, your followers, every mark of your blasphemy. Confess or perish." He did not flinch. He did not step back. His eyes shone with something that made my pen pause, my heart catch. "You will not stop what comes," he said softly, almost a whisper, yet cutting through the tension. "You see only shadows. You hear only echoes. You cannot name what waits. I am only its first voice." The Inquisitor's hand tightened on the pistol. A silence, taut as wire, hung between them. Shadows seemed to lean closer, and the air vibrated faintly, carrying a presence I could feel pressing against my chest. The hive held its breath, and then, without a word, the Inquisitor backed away. Not retreating, but calculating, eyes sharp, mind racing. The danger was clear, undeniable. This was not a mortal fool. This was something else, something chosen, something that would not be stopped by force alone. I stepped back into the shadows, recording every detail, every word, every gesture. The hive had become a stage. The presence unseen waited, and he remained calm, confident, serene in a way that chilled me. The seeds of devotion were now a threat, a storm gathering beyond the narrow corridors. The first confrontation had passed. The hive would not remain quiet. The Inquisition would return, but the ritual, the whispers, the presence, it had taken root. And I knew, as I watched him move silently back to the marks, that what was coming next was inevitable. The hive was quiet, almost too quiet. Shadows clung to walls and ceilings, stretching into corridors like fingers. He moved among them, muttering softly at first. Fragments of words, whispers that scraped at the edges of understanding. The presence had grown stronger, pressing through him into the air, into every corner. His steps were uneven, shoulders hunched, yet his head was held high. Eyes darted wide and bright, catching every flicker of light, every shadow. Every movement was precise, deliberate, yet frantic. I followed silently, noting every twitch, every pause, every shiver of his fingers. The whispers grew louder. Not words anymore, more like cries, stretching, bending, twisting into sounds that rattled the teeth and chilled the soul. They came from him, yet from everywhere. The walls seemed to echo the voice, the shadows carried it, and sometimes I swore I felt it pressing against my chest, as if it wanted to speak to me too. He laughed suddenly, a sound that was almost human yet hollow, reverberating in the empty halls. It cut through the whispers, startling the others. Their eyes widened. Some took a step back, hands raised instinctively. But he moved forward, calm amidst chaos, guiding them without touching, without speaking. The group followed, eyes fixed, lips trembling with repetition. The marks on the walls seemed to glow faintly in response. Candles flickered violently, some snuffed out. The air was heavy, thick with tension and something unseen. I could feel it pressing on my skull, a weight without form. He paused in the center of a wide corridor, hands lifted, trembling. He trembled, yes, but with control, with purpose. The whispers rose to a crescendo, shrieking, screaming, bending the air with their force. He shouted then a single word that seemed to echo through every stone, every pipe, every shadow. Listen! The effect was immediate. Even the walls seemed to shiver. The cultists quaked in place. I felt my own heartbeat spike. The hive itself seemed to hold its breath. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were commands, pulses beckoning to something beyond comprehension. He staggered, then straightened, eyes blazing, wide, alert. He laughed again, softly this time, a sound full of certainty. It is here. It comes. I am ready. Each word trembled on his lips, yet carried a strange authority. Those who followed him mirrored his movements, their own eyes reflecting terror and awe. I took careful notes. Every motion, every whispered fragment, every flick of his hand mattered. The presence pulsed around him. Shadows moved as if alive. Candles guttered, throwing light in twisted patterns. Dust swirled in slow spirals. The hive seemed to bend, listening, anticipating. He fell to his knees suddenly, trembling, panting. The whispers became screams, the walls vibrated. I had never felt anything like it. And yet, in the madness, he was focused, serene, aware beyond human measure. A vessel, the first vessel. His lips moved in silent repetition. Fingers traced patterns in the air. Eyes rolled back, yet clarity shone from them. The group followed instinctively, repeating, mimicking, amplifying the effects. The hive itself seemed alive, breathing, straining towards something unseen. And I realized then, this was only the beginning. The whispers had become a roar. The hive had become a stage. He was no longer simply a man. He was something more, something chosen, something that could not be ignored. The shadows thickened. The air trembled. I watched, pen trembling in my hand. The next phase was coming. The ritual was far from over, and he was already lost to the presence that had chosen him. The hive held its breath. Shadows pooled in the corners, thick and dark. The group formed a circle around him. Candles flickered violently, throwing the walls into chaotic patterns. The air vibrated with whispers, now louder, sharper, more insistent. He knelt in the center. Hands raised, fingers twitching, tracing shapes in the air. The murmurs had become a chant, growing in intensity. I stayed at the edge, pen ready, heart tight. Every detail mattered, every twitch, every tremor, every whisper. The ground beneath him seemed to pulse, shadows stretched, bending unnaturally. Dust spiraled into the air, catching the faint light, turning corridors into a haze of movement and chaos. The hive itself seemed alive, straining toward him. He gasped, body shaking, yet remained upright. Then, without warning, his knees buckled. He fell forward onto the floor, arms flailing, chest heaving. Blood welled from his mouth, bright and shocking against the dim light. Yet he smiled, a grin too wide, too knowing, too unnatural. The cultists gasped. Some recoiled, others leaned in, drawn as if by gravity. The whispers twisted around them, shaping the air, bending reality in subtle, terrifying ways. I could feel the pulse of something immense, something beyond comprehension pressing against the walls, the ceiling, even through my skin. He writhed on the floor, yet not in pain. Every movement was deliberate, almost ritualistic. Blood spread around him, soaking the stone. Shadows seemed to gather there, as if the hive itself acknowledged the moment. Candles guttered, throwing flames into chaotic, flickering shapes. I could see his eyes, wide and bright, even as his body trembled violently. He was laughing, muttering, speaking fragments of words I could not understand. The sound carried an authority that chilled me to the bone. He was no longer merely human. The cultists mimicked his movements, repeating the whispered fragments. The energy in the room thickened. A vibration ran through the stone floors, dust and shadow swirled, patterns forming in the air. The hive was no longer just a backdrop. It was a participant, a witness, a conduit. He raised his head suddenly. Blood streaked across his face, mouth open in a rictus of laughter, eyes blazing with clarity and madness intertwined. "It comes. I feel it. I am ready." His voice cut through the air, echoing down the corridors, drawing every shadow, every pulse of the hive into the moment. I stepped back, trembling. The ritual had reached its apex. The presence that had chosen him pressed close, tangible yet unseen. The cultists moved in unison, responding to the vibrations, the whispers, the invisible force that dictated the rhythm. And then he fell still. Breath heavy, chest rising and falling in ragged waves. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and vivid. His eyes met mine for a moment. That grin remained wide and knowing, terrifying in its serenity. The hive was silent, expectant, waiting. I knew then that the ritual had changed him. He was no longer just a man kneeling in a corridor. He was something else, something chosen. The whispers had claimed him fully, the hive, the shadows, even the walls themselves, all acknowledged it. The next step approached. Nothing could halt it now. The vessel had been made, and I could only stand and witness. The hive was silent, but heavy with expectation. Shadows clung to walls, thick and restless. He lay on the floor, chest heaving, blood pooling around him. The whispers had become a roar. The presence pressed close, tangible yet unseen. He raised his head slowly, eyes blazing with light and madness, a smile wide, unnerving, stretched across his face. Every twitch, every motion, every murmur was precise, deliberate, guided by something far beyond human comprehension. The cultists watched in awe and terror. They mimicked his movements, repeated fragments of the voice, as if each echo shaped the very air. Candles flickered violently, casting shifting shadows. Dust swirled in spirals, caught in currents they could not see. The hive itself seemed alive, responding to the force that had claimed him. He lifted his hands, trembling, shaking, yet commanding. Words came from his lips, fragments, whispers, cries. I could not understand them fully, but their weight pressed against my mind. The presence within him pulsed outward, touching walls, shadows, hearts. And then he spoke, clearly, fully. "You are the ear, the mouth, the hand of me." The voice carried, echoed, and seemed to fill the hive itself. The cultists trembled, some fell to their knees, others repeated the words with trembling lips, eyes wide in terror and devotion. His body convulsed, violently yet with purpose. Blood flowed freely, yet he moved as if nothing could harm him. His laughter rang through the corridors, soft at first, then growing. A sound both human and impossibly alien. It struck something deep in the hive, a resonance that made walls, pipes, even shadows shiver. And then, the transformation completed. His form twisted, shifting subtly yet profoundly. Flesh and mind bent to the presence that had chosen him. He was no longer a man, not merely a vessel, something greater, terrible beyond comprehension. The cultists felt it, recoiled, yet could not look away. The whispers became a chorus, rising, falling, pulsing through the hive. Every corridor, every chamber, every shadow seemed to vibrate with acknowledgement. He rose to his feet, steadier than ever, eyes ablaze with a clarity that was terrifying. I could only watch, pen frozen, heart pounding. The hive had changed around him. The air itself carried the weight of something ancient and unnameable. The first vessel had been made. The presence had claimed its instrument. He stepped forward slowly, deliberately. Shadows parted before him. The cultists followed instinctively, whispering, repeating, spreading the will of the unseen. The hive was alive with anticipation, and the Inquisition would soon arrive, but too late to stop what had begun. I took a step back into the shadows. The vessel moved past me. I felt its power brush against my mind, a soft pull, a reminder that even I, a mere witness, might carry the seed of what had been awakened. And as he disappeared into the darkness beyond the corridors, the voice echoed once more, a whisper now, calm and certain. The four are never enough. I come, and he was only the beginning. The hive remained still, yet I knew it would never be the same. The presence had taken root. The first vessel walked among them, and I had seen it all. The hive erupted into chaos. Smoke curled through narrow corridors. Shadows writhed across blackened walls. Cultists moved like a single fevered organism. They shouted, screamed, laughed, voices breaking on the edge of madness. Whispers of the presence slipped through the air, carried on trembling lips. The Inquisition descended with fire and steel. Flamers spat waves of orange and white. Bolters cracked, tearing through stone and flesh alike. Plasma scorched metal and burned through screaming bodies. Shouts and cries of pain intertwined with the roar of flame and gunfire. Dust hung in the air, thick and choking, swirling in the heat. Cultists scattered, some shrieking as they fled, others standing their ground, repeating fragments of the voice. Some fell, consumed by fire or bullets. Others traced the marks on the walls even as their world collapsed around them. Their devotion burned brighter than their fear. It was terrifying and mesmerizing. I moved through the chaos, keeping to the shadows. My notes shook in my hands, flames licked at the stone. Smoke clawed at my lungs, yet everywhere I looked, fragments of the presence lingered. A symbol untouched by the fire, a whispered fragment of words. The voice was not gone. It had only hidden, patient, certain. Through the haze I saw him, a shadow among shadows, smiling, calm, the fire, the screams, the fleeing cultists. None of it seemed to touch him. He moved deliberately, guiding the remnants, spreading the influence as if the hive itself obeyed his silent command. The Inquisition pressed on, purging, burning, shooting, crushing. But the hive had already changed. The marks, the whispers, the trembling hearts, they endured. Even in destruction, the first seed of the presence remained, rooted deep within the stone and spirit. Night fell, the flames burned low, smoke clung to every corner, silence followed the chaos, heavy and uneasy. Then I saw him again, and standing at the edge of the darkness, bloodied, altered, yet calm. His eyes gleamed with certainty. No longer entirely human, not entirely lost, present, powerful. He looked at me. A whisper carried through the cold air. The four are never enough. He is coming, and I am only the beginning. The words struck me like iron, echoing through my chest, resonating in my mind. The shadows seemed to draw closer. The hive itself seemed to lean in, listening. Then he vanished, into a darkness deeper than the smoke and ruin of the hive. The cultists scattered, some fleeing, some kneeling, repeating the whispers in awe and fear. The Inquisition moved swiftly, but their fire, their bolters, their purge could not erase the presence. It lingered, subtle yet undeniable, woven into the stone, the air, the hearts of the survivors. I left the hive soon after, notes clutched in trembling hands. My mind was haunted by the echoes, by the vision of him, transformed, chosen, unstoppable. The hive behind me still whispered, the shadows still breathed, and in the quiet moments I could swear. I still heard him laughing. Sometimes, in the warp I felt it, faint yet near, watching, waiting, and I asked myself, shivering with a dread I could not name. Had it chosen me too? Had I, the witness, carried its seed without knowing? The hive was quiet now, quiet only in appearance. Its heart still beat with whispers, its shadows still stirred with fragments of the unnameable. The first vessel had vanished. The presence remained, patient, eternal, inevitably it would come again.